Okay, welcome. It looks like everybody has poured in. Welcome to our TPE Candidate Roundtable. My name is Nick Bates. I serve as the Assistant Director of Thurman Center Networks in the Howard Thurman Center for Common Ground at Boston University, as well as I am one of the co-chairs for our candidate development sub-working group, along with Christian. And Christian, you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Nick. Absolutely. So good morning, afternoon, day, evening, wherever you're located right now or virtually in this recording. My name is Christian Rafael Suero, he, him, his. I'm the current Assistant Director for Staff Development, Engagement, and Onboarding at George Mason University. Now I'll pass back to Nick.
So I do want to let everyone know, and if you are a candidate searching, that we are recording. And so if you are someone who does not want this to be shared because you do not want your employer to know that you're searching, I want to give you the warning that this is this place that you would turn off your camera. Just so that I know some folks are in those type of situations. So I want to let you know and make you aware that we are recording these sessions to be available later on our YouTube. If you are not one of those folks and you do not care about that, then feel free to leave your camera on. Today we have our first candidate roundtable, and I want to make note that this is a candidate roundtable. This is an opportunity for you all to be in discussion with two professionals in the field who are related to our particular theme of the day. And today our theme is I got a job from TPE, and no, it was not a housing or residence life job. And this session is about combating the popular myth that TPE is only about residence life job and residence life roles, and that is not the case. Again, I'll remind you all that over 50% of the jobs represented at TPE are actually non-housing related roles. But we have two people who actually went through the placement exchange as candidates and secured their first roles via the placement exchange, and their roles were not housing related. And so our candidate roundtables are meant to be conversational. So this is your opportunity to ask as many questions as you can. You can do so by popping them in the chat or the raise your hand function. But we will start with our two candidates, and I'll give them the opportunities actually to introduce themselves. I'm happy to be in the space with Junior and Alexander, and they can tell you a little bit more about the work that they currently do, the role that they started with, and they can also talk about their TPE experiences as two folks who were not looking for housing related roles. And so without further ado, we'll get our roundtable started. This is I got a job from TPE, but it was not housing. And we'll start with Junior and let Junior introduce himself and offer whatever he wants to offer to the space, and then we'll go to Alexander.
Yo, thank you, Nick, for just kind of getting the ball rolling. So hello, everyone. My name is Junior Peña, he, him, his pronouns. I currently serve as the Assistant Director for Leadership, Engagement, Advocacy, and Diversity at Salem State University here in Massachusetts. My role that I got out of TPE was actually serving as the Assistant Director for Multicultural Student Affairs at the University of Miami in Florida, where Alex actually currently resides. So we actually used to be former co-workers. And what I'm going to say to set the tone, right? We're going to set the vibe and the kind of connection we're going to have today. So when I was considering TPE, I tweeted out into the void that is Twitter, and I said, yo, has anyone ever gotten a job out of TPE that wasn't housing? And Nick at the time was my homie, and he tweeted at Alex, who's up in here right now, and Alex responded to me and said, yeah, I got a job at TPE that wasn't housing. And so to tell you how small the world is, I ended up interviewing, and I didn't know Alex. I didn't follow up with Alex. I was like, dope, that's cool. We had maybe like a 2-tweet exchange or something like that. But then I had an on-campus interview at the University of Miami in Florida, and I was creeping on all the people's profiles, seeing, you know, who was going to be interviewing me and all this other stuff. And I just remember the photo, and I literally was like, yo, where is this photo from? Like, I know I've met this person, I've conversed with this person in some capacity. And so then on my on-campus interview, right before we were about to jump into a campus partner interview, I saw Alex, and I literally was like, yo, where do I know you from? Like, I feel like we've conversed or something. And he was like, I'm the one that told you to go to TPE. And so that is actually how Alex and I got connected initially. And we were co-workers for a few years. I worked at the University of Miami, and now I'm here at Salem State University. And so my goal today will be to give you some really dope advice, support, and guidance, and also right size it, understanding that the context is a little bit different with the pandemic and some of those other things. So I'll try to translate my experience as much as possible to what you're experiencing today and now, as I support a lot of graduate students currently. So I'm excited to connect with y'all. I'll pass it over to Alex now.
Appreciate it, Junior. Thank you, man. First and foremost, I just want to say what's up to everybody in the room. It's good to see you all's faces as well as your black screens with the names. I mean, that's always cool too. But on these sessions, I always like to give a shout out to those people that are on the West Coast also. I know the timing is different. You know, I think it's 3 hours over there compared to the hour ahead over here. So shout out to those of you on the West Coast. Some of them early morning meetings here on the East Coast would be super early for y'all. So thank you all for tuning in today. As they mentioned earlier, my name is Alexander Martin. Right now, I currently serve as the Assistant Director for Student Athlete Development here at the University of Miami. I actually got my first role right out of TPE 2015, also at the University of Miami. I was Assistant Director of Student Activities and Student Organizations. Really, what Junior mentioned about just the level of connectivity and how higher ed is such a small world was going to be the same story that I gave y'all, but just realizing that, you know, the world is small, but the people you meet, it all comes back full circle. And to this day, I'm still proud to, one, be connected to both Nick and Junior, and we still talk to each other every day. That's all love. But really what I want to do for y'all today is be able to explain just the relevance of transferable skills, how they work in higher ed and getting from one space to another, whether that's GA to professional or moving from one spot to the next and moving from one position to the next. It all rounds about. You just got to be able to know how to work your transferable skills. So I'm excited to be with you all today. Please come with questions. We'll come with responses. As Nick mentioned, this is a roundtable. This is a dialogue. It's not a lecture. I want to be able to communicate with you all, connect with you all, and engage with you all. So I'm excited to be here.
Thank you all for giving such wonderful introductions and showing everyone how small the world is, and also a shout out to future Dr. Alexander Martin on finishing comprehensive exams recently, and so that's always a blessing and progress in itself. Can you all give our audience a little bit about your journey? So tell us a little bit about your grad school journey and also your entry into, well, let's start with the grad school journey and then tell us about your TPE experience.
I'll go ahead and go on this one since Junior went first last time. And I love this question, and I'll try to make it short because it's fairly lengthy. I'll try to make it short, but just again, the relevance. So Nick and I went to undergrad together, and we actually did our graduate school search together. And the reason I want to bring this up is because we actually didn't get into our first graduate school application, which was at the Ohio State University. I mean, when like we had, and this is not to brag or boast, but this is just knowing how good a skill set we had. We were implementing and creating initiatives at the administrative level as undergrads at SIU. When we applied to, the Ohio State University, they pretty much told us that what we were bringing to the table just wasn't enough. Mind you, we both had letters of recommendation from the chancellor of SIU, but we still didn't get in. Now, at some point, some people would have took that as been like, you know what? I mean, if Ohio State ain't really looking at you, then, what are we going to do now? But we just took that as fuel and just, took our talents and we stayed at SIU. But I think what we did at SIU was build our skill sets around what we knew: programming, higher ed, and engagement. We took that. And I think, Nick, if you don't mind me speaking on it, we flourished. Again, I'll put me and Nick's resumes against anybody in our cohorts, but that's just because we knew the fire we had for what it is we wanted to do. Now, when I got in grad school, I started really functioning around what it is I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I was a former student athlete. I had this 2 years to kind of figure out, my life, what it is I want to do in higher ed. I knew I wanted to do something around a mentoring, but I didn't just want it to be one-on-one mentoring. I didn't want to be minimized just in the level of mentoring. So I started researching university presidents. And ever since grad school, my ultimate career goal is to become a university president. That's why I decided to go into my doctorate. Like, I can't be university president without that PhD in front of my name. So that was really my goal for that. But I think it was in grad school where I started realizing not only what it is I wanted to do, but how I wanted to get there. And so me looking at wanting to become a university president, not too many presidents come from a higher ed background. I already knew that. Many of the higher ed presidents many of the university presidents that have a higher ed background are at HBCUs. But if you look at a lot of the top tier institutions or Power 5 institutions, what we call them in athletics, a lot of university presidents have engineering backgrounds, public policy backgrounds, medical backgrounds. So I'm already looking at, all right, I can look at this as a deficit, or I can look at it as an opportunity to take what I know in my transferable skills and apply it to another area. But for me, like, grad school was this unique space where I was learning so much, but at the same time, for me, I wasn't learning enough about what it is I wanted to do, because what I wanted to do, I didn't see very many people that, one, looked like me, but two, had the same interests as me. So that moment or 2 years of exploration in graduate school and taking that all the way up to TPE really helped define really who I am and what I want to do in higher ed.
Yeah, so my experience was a little bit different, kind of similar to what Alex mentioned in some ways. So I did my graduate work at Florida State University, where I served as a graduate assistant in our Center for Leadership and Social Change. And so I entered in graduate school really knowing that I wanted to do a lot of work around leadership development. I had a strong background around community engagement and service orientation. And then I had this kind of social justice, diversity, equity, inclusion work perspective that really informed my practice, but I didn't have a whole lot of formal experience just because of my undergrad. So at Florida State, I took advantage of really being able to process and try to get connected to as many practicum experiences or opportunities to just really see what that practical application of work looked like. And so I served as an advisor for our Hispanic Latino Student Union. I worked with our first gen students. I did some work with Leadership, which is a national organization. And so I was a graduate of Leadership as an undergrad and was able to run the program at Florida State University for a year. And then also, and still later served with Leadership in a different capacity. So I had a lot of these different experiences. When I was going through the TPE job search, as a result, I was kind of, for lack of a better phrase, lost in the sauce. And so I had a lot of like interest, a lot of interest that I wanted to shoot my shot at, and I did. And what I recommend that you all do is that if you have the experiences or that you feel you have the capability or the skill set to be able to translate what you've done for different roles, then do so. I did apply to some housing jobs. I applied to student activities roles. I applied to leadership development roles, community engagement, and then diversity, equity, inclusion. What was interesting about TPE for me, more so than anything, was that I was able to see how I felt when I was engaging around those different content areas. And overwhelmingly, I felt like after the first few interviews I had, I was like, yo, I'm getting most of the energy, most of the love, most of like the connection when I'm talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice spaces where I'm thinking about liberation in ways that are different. And so I knew after going through TPE that that's kind of where I wanted to direct my energy. And so I know for me, something that I'll recommend you all do is like do some thorough vetting of like job descriptions, because even if they formally fall within functional areas that you might not neatly connect to, you might find that they may have like an operational budget or a line for like an innovation fund. You might find that they're looking for people that have a diversity, equity, inclusion lens or a leadership lens or an engagement lens. And so you can be able to translate some of the things that you're navigating in your current graduate program to be able to do some work that might be a little bit outside of what you typically wanted to do, but that might inform or that you might be able to really bring a dope perspective to. So I think that TPE for me served in a lot of ways just as an opportunity to scale and see how I felt about the interviews, engage with institutions. And anyone who knows me, I'm a pretty confident person. So I kind of enjoyed the whole TPE process. I was like, yo, let's talk, because something I will say is you got to enter this space with the mentality that you're also interviewing institutions. All right, don't get it twisted. You're providing a service that you will be properly compensated for. So as a result, show up with some tough questions, hold people accountable, and make sure you're ready to be able to engage accordingly. What are you nervous about, right? Like they need you just as much as you need them. Keep it a buck.
No, thank you both for sharing that. Can you talk to us about TPE, right? Attending the conference. What were your thoughts as you were interviewing? And tell the people how many interviews did you have? I'm pretty sure people want to know. And so just talk to us about that specific process of going through it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, my TPE experience was 2015, but I guess to hear now that the popular question is still, how many interviews do you have? Let me be the first to tell y'all this. It does not matter, right? How many interviews you have at TPE, because you can only accept one job. I'm gonna just put it out there. So whoever said, yeah, I got 27 interviews, that's great, but you can't accept 27. You can't accept 27 jobs. Like it does not work like that. When I was interviewing at TPE, I had five 5 total. Again, I was looking at campus activities because that's where my skill set was, in campus activities, programming, and student activities and student organizations. Now, going in, did I have friends who were in the housing realm? Yes, absolutely. They were accepting 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, interviews at a time. And I'm like, if that works for you, great. That would stress me out, all the way out. Like, I think honestly, if you go into TPE with the mindset of how many interviews you have as opposed to how many specific jobs that you're looking for, it's going to mess up your mindset. When you go into TPE, you're looking for a job, obviously, right? You're looking for a job, but you want to look for your best fit. If you're just going out there clicking accept on everyone that talks to you, I think you're doing yourself a disservice because you're sacrificing sleep and you're adding on more stress than you need. Right. So for me, I remember I accepted 5 interviews. Within those interviews, I got invited to 2 of the receptions, and honestly didn't choose either one of the schools. The University of Miami wasn't one of the schools I interviewed with. By me choosing to do those 5, knew there were 5 schools I could see myself working at. 3 were in campus activities. 1 was in a DE&I role, and another was in like a new creating role that was around, I think Junior mentioned innovation. Right. But for me, TPE, it wasn't about how many interviews I could get done over the course of those 2 or 3 days, because that's not what it's about. You want to set yourself up for success while you're in TPE. And if your idea of setting yourself up for success is taking as many interviews as you can over the course of 3 days, you're not even going to be able to enjoy TPE, because you're going to start forgetting, what interview was at what time. You're going to say somebody's name wrong. You're going to say somebody's institution wrong. You don't have time to research your position. You're just going out there and hoping for the best, shooting half-court shots. That's not what you do at TPE. You got to go into TPE being intentional. If you have, 10 to 12, interview offers, that's great. If you want to take all 10 to 12, that's fine. But I would encourage you, out of that list, figure out the ones you could really see yourself working at. What positions do you really think you can add value to, right? But again, I only had 5, and 5 was all I needed. 5 was all I needed. Junior, what's up?
Yeah, what is up? So Abigail, I see that you asked, what is this reception you spoke of? So in the in-person version of TPE, the way it would work is that you would have these interviews, and institutions would have different rounds. And so if you made it to a certain point in the interview process with an institution, some may be hosting a physical reception location for all of their candidates. And it's probably like, the best way that I could put it is like a Shark Tank, where you go to this reception and all of the candidates that literally want your job are there. And so you're just recepting and mingling with people that work there. Tons of fun, really great experience. I will say that it did add to how you were able to understand institutions. And so for me, I will say, like I mentioned, I had a pretty wide range net in terms of the things that I was interested in doing and had experience with. So I did do a significant amount of interviews. I don't even know that I could put a number to it. But what I would say is that I was always very specific in terms of the type of institution and the place that I wanted to work at. Mainly because, like, as Alex mentioned, I wasn't just going to interview anywhere for the sake of saying that I interviewed anywhere. This being said, right? This was my experience in 2016. So a little bit different. If I'm going to be real with you all, there's going to be significantly more candidates now than there are positions. It's $25, right? So you have to understand that your role now as a candidate is going to be vastly different than what Alex and I were kind of traversing and navigating. So something that I would recommend you think about is, how do you make connections with the people you do interface with? Whether that's 1, 2, 3, 100. And what I mean by that is, one of the things that was unique to my TPE experience that I think was so valuable, and why I believe it is actually incredibly helpful as a starter to your employment process, is that if an institution doesn't currently have a position available to you, but you do really well, you could get offered a position or an opportunity down the road. And what I found is that I always opened the avenue for that communication to continue. Whether that was me turning down a position, I'll be transparent in saying I turned down 6 jobs before I took the University of Miami job. And whenever I turned down that job, I always said, would love to connect in the future. If you all need any support, let's make sure we do that. And I'll tell you that some of the people that would have been my supervisors that offered me that job, I then brought to the University of Miami to facilitate sessions or to put on a program or to speak at one of our conferences. And they're people that I still to this day link up with, connect with, and am able to look at as mentors and people that are colleagues in this world, right? And so understand that if you treat every single interaction with some deliberateness and care and love and energy, then it'll be brought back to you in different ways. And even if there isn't something that's currently there for you, there's an opportunity for you to create a space and a connection that goes beyond just that one singular position that could maybe lead up to a conversation or an interview down the road.
If I could also add real quick, because I saw the message in the chat, but I'm also getting a couple private messages about the reception thing. So just real quick, when you get to TPE, you'll do that first interview, right? You'll interview with the two people that are at the table. Later on, though, in your little mailbox, you just might get inside an envelope something that looks like, it might look like this. It's an invitation to that school's reception. Now, what it means is kind of like a low key, like a 1.5, the interview 1.5 is what I like to call it, where you'll go, you get to meet other professionals that work at that school, but it's kind of more like a on-campus interview at TPE. It's you and probably their top 3, maybe 4 other candidates from TPE. Like Junior mentioned, like you're meeting your competition there, but at least you all get to see each other, you know who you're competing against. But you get to meet other colleagues that, I mean, NASPA is huge, right? TPE is huge. Everybody brings at least 10 to 15 people with them. But when you get, it's what you want. When you get invited to that reception, that just means that they're looking at you as one of their candidates for a potential on-campus after after NASPA. So it's definitely a place you want to be. I'll say that.
Yeah, and to the receptions point as well, usually those receptions were institutional receptions that were attached to NASPA in particular. And you'll find in the traditional setting of NASPA and TPE, it all kind of merged together for those of us who spent so many years going through TPE to NASPA as well. And so those institutions were sponsoring those sessions via NASPA, and some candidates were invited to those sessions as well. So make a clarifying point on that. And then I also want to highlight that we do here at the Placement Exchange Virtual, we do have institutional spotlights, right? Which is a little bit different than what Alexander and Junior are referring to. Institutional spotlights are just the opportunity to highlight the institution and then have representatives from the institution speaking about all of the wonderful and amazing things that individual institution is doing. You can find those on the TPE schedule. There are some actually happening right now, and they will be happening today and tomorrow here at the Placement Exchange. Thank you all for that. The next question that I also want to ask you all, and also folks, feel free to send some messages in the chat as well. You can ask questions via that way, but I want to ask you all about right, navigating your interview schedule, right? Both of you all said great words, right? It's not about the amount of interviews you have, it's about quality and being very intentional. How did you all deal with particularly pressure? And so Alexander and I both did TPE at the same time. We actually stayed together, and on his spectrum, right, he had 5 interviews. I had 31 interviews, right? I'm not recommending anybody do that. I actually was not as intentional as Alexander mentioned in the latter part of my TP experience, but how do you all navigate sort of peer pressure? And even if it's not peer pressure, but just feeling like I need to measure myself up against someone else, against someone else's TP experience, right? Junior sort of alluded to competition, even though we know that there's no real competition, but just talk to us about that experience for the both of you all.
Yo, do you mind if I take this one, Alex, to start?
Go ahead, bro.
So I'm gonna be honest with you. Everyone is gonna talk this down, but it's there. You undoubtedly will compare yourself to the next person, especially if you have people that are going from the same cohort or whatever. And it's all because you're trying to make sure that you're like, you're trying to make it seem as if you're making sure that you're adequate, that you're capable. I'll tell you right now, if you've made it to the end of your graduate school experience, then you're capable and you have the credentials to be employed, right? That's the first thing. I think secondly, you have to understand that your trajectory and your process is going to be undoubtedly different. Do you have the same location expectations as the person in your cohort? Do you have the same family, financial, functional area, interests or needs as the person next to you? You don't. And so I think what you need to understand throughout this entire process is that your experience is different on every level other than the fact that you're here with other graduate students or new professionals, right? Like that's literally the only thing that you all have in common, and that you all want a job. And to tell you right now that that's what you need to center. I, and anyone in my cohort can probably attest to this, I don't see other people as my competition. And so when I was going through the process, and Ricky is actually one of Nikki and Nick and I's like homies, Ricky Mankey, and he's an assistant director at Wentworth Institution. So I'll give you some context. Me and Ricky were at almost every single interview, the same interviews. We were at the same receptions. And Ricky would be like, yo, Junior, so what are you doing out here, dog? Like, I didn't think you was really vibing with this school, right? And I'd be like, yeah, but I'm gonna test it out. I'm gonna check it out, right? But, and Ricky was my roommate, one of my roommates for the hotel experience too. And what we did was, the moment I did an interview that I knew Ricky was gonna go to as well, I told him what the questions were. I told them exactly what was going on. I told them what they shared in terms of experiences. And the reason for that was because I didn't see Ricky as my competition. I saw Ricky as a person that I knew was capable, was comparable, and someone that if the fit and the vibe with that institution was better, then he'll get the position. At the end of the day, you can finesse your way into an interview, but you can't finesse the feeling that you're gonna have with the institution. You can't finesse your way into a role, right? So at the end of the day, your credentials, your experience, your ability to articulate and translate those experiences is what will set you apart. If you're so busy looking at what the next person has or what the next person's got, you're not gonna be able to do that adequately. Focus your energy on doing that really well. And that's the whole intention and purpose of doing multiple rounds of interviews, is to make sure that whoever they're looking for, they're able to identify. And as someone that has sat as a hiring manager, I can ensure you that if I pick 5 people, I have an idea of who those top 2 people are. Now it's your job to convince me otherwise. So that's what you should be focusing your energy on, not whether Alex has the same amount of interviews as me or whether we're applying to the same school, because you have every ability and opportunity to translate your skill set in a way that's effective for other people.
Amen. But and to go back to what Junior said at the very beginning, it's going to happen. Whether you're sitting next to somebody or you're rooming with somebody, either they're going to ask, you're going to wonder, so how many interviews do you have? My advice is don't even worry about it. Like, if you can help yourself and don't even ask, don't ask anybody else. But my friend has this quote, right? And they say there's no competition when you stay in your own lane. And I live by that. I live by it. I'm telling you, me and Nick literally worked together from sophomore year all the way up through graduate school, and still work together now. We went through TPE together. So you mean it's like, I'm gonna be honest with y'all. Like 100%, I had 5 and Nick had plus 30. There were times we would literally in our hotel room, and I'm like, this man really got 30 interviews, yo. Like, that's crazy. But then I remember, like, again, I got to stay in my lane. Me and Nick, yes, we have similar aspirational roles, but as far as career roles, that's where we may differ. Like, he may have been looking at housing. I was looking at specifically campus activities because that's where my skill set was. That's where my lane was. There was only 5 at the time. But as far as setting myself up for success in the TPE space, to me, it was all about making sure that I had time in between my interviews. Because what I didn't want to do was do back-to-back interviews. To me, that's not setting myself up for success. I wanted to make sure that in between each interview, I had time to go eat, had time to go use the bathroom. If I can catch a nap, great. If I can go get something to eat, perfect. But I wanted to make sure I had time to research the institution I was going to. Because what I didn't want to do in the interview was trick myself trying to remember, okay, one, who am I talking to? But also, what position is this and at what institution? So I think when you go into an interview, you want to come in as well prepared as you can. That means researching the institution, researching the position, and researching the people that you're actually interviewing. Because the more you know about them, that's what's actually going to surprise them. It's like, okay, well, not only do you know about this position and you know about the institution, but you know about me also. Like, we may be from the same town, or we may both be alumni of the same alma mater, things like that. You want to go in and make sure that you set yourself up for success. And something I tell my student athletes all the time is pace your professional development. I tell our graduate students, you got to pace your professional development. If you're in this whole competition thing, like, I get it, you want that rush of adrenaline, you want to be just like everybody else, but the way you operate in a specific space may not be the exact same as the way somebody else operates in another space. You have to run your own race, stay in your own lane, and things will work out for you the best way they should for you. Because if you're spending your entire TPE time trying to figure out where the next person's going to be at for their interview, then you're wasting your own mental stress. Like, you're adding more stress than you needed. You're adding unneeded stress now. Now you're making everybody else in the TPE room stressed because they see you looking stressed. You know what I'm saying? So run your own way, run your own race, pace your professional development. And again, there's no competition when you stay in your own lane.
All right, so I'll ask you all this last question, and then please, for our audience, please feel free to ask some questions in the chat, via directly or indirectly at large. My last question is about this idea of functional areas. So both of you all are on, pseudo second, third role in higher ed, even though Alexander would argue that he's not in higher ed anymore. I beg to differ because I'm using this same argument as well, but for you all, as you were interviewing, right, and you both interviewed for multiple different types of positions and different types of functional areas, what were you looking for? As we know, the functional areas, they pretty much share a lot of the same things, but what were you looking to hear as an interviewee when you were in your interviews, right? What were you looking to hear that lets you know that this may or may not be a place for me to work?
I had a whole set of criteria. So I actually appreciate that question, Nick. So for me, before I even got to the interview, there was things that I answered for myself. So I was in Tallahassee, Florida. If you've ever been to Tallahassee, Florida, love it to death. There's no international airport. It's hella expensive to get out of there. So if you're trying to, vacation, you're trying to visit some family, it was tough. So before I even got to the interview, I wanted to be in a city. I wanted to have an international airport. I wanted to be in a community that had Black and brown folks, gonna be real, potentially in a community that I could do some dating. Yo, you got a whole life outside of, your higher ed job. And then I was also I had like a specific salary range in mind. So when I was looking at institutions, those were all personal things that were informing the professional needs. In terms of the professional needs that I had, I needed to be in a space where I feel like I could grow, that I had autonomy, and that I had a supervisor that would be able to support my work, and that I could be able to do good work. So when I was looking at things like the interview process, I was asking questions not only about what the culture was like in that office, what did it look like in terms of success, what were the issues that people in the past had to deal with in that particular role, but then also, what do you all do to have fun? What do you all do to relax and take care of yourself? What do you all do to disconnect from the work? Is there a culture where you feel like you can do that? If not, what makes it difficult? Like, you have to understand that when you're picking a job, that is a place where you're spending a lot of time at. And if you don't have the colleagues, the support staff, the people there to be able to ride with you, you're gonna have a very difficult time. And the reason why I say that is because if you have a difficult supervisory relationship, then you at least have colleagues to look for. If you have a difficult colleague situation, then you at least have a supervisor that you can rely on. You need something to be able to get you through these days and these, you'll undoubtedly have ruts, right? So I think for me, I was looking at a lot of things, but before the interview, was looking at those personal pieces just because I felt like they were important for me. And then also those professional things that I was looking for in any role. And I think that allowed for me to say, I can get a good supervision, get amazing colleagues, get a culture that's conducive to my well-being. I can do work around equity, inclusion, and social justice in any functional area. Like, you could put me in career services and I'm gonna hold you all accountable to how do we do some culturally informed, career coaching. We can do a whole conversation about this, or how whiteness shows up in our professionalism standards, right? And so I think that I didn't necessarily tie my work to an office space. I tied it to the people, the institution, the culture that I wanted to be at. And I think that allowed for me to navigate the job process a lot easier.
Yeah, just touching on two quick things Junior mentioned. One, culture is huge. Culture is huge. But also I want to touch on that salary aspect, because I know that's also a hot topic. Miami, Florida is 103% more expensive than Carbondale, Illinois when I went to graduate school. So first thing, when I went to my interview, or the on-campus interview in Miami, I pulled up my cost of living adjustment and was like, all right, let's talk. I like this institution, but I'm not liking this cost of living. Like, a one bedroom here is like $1,800, easy. You know what I'm saying? So I looked at that starting salary and I was like, yo, what's the negotiation range we have right here? What is your budget on this? Because here's where I'm at now, and here's where I'm coming. And I literally pulled up the number fact sheet for them so they can see exactly what I was talking about. Because if you talk about salary, you always want to come in prepared to have that conversation with your facts, right? So I came in and showed them all that. Luckily enough, I was able to get that salary increase to increased by $2,000. But that was only because I came in prepared at first. Because one thing I wasn't going to sacrifice my livelihood and the ability to live a life for the job that I wanted. Like, yes, I love the University of Miami. Yes, I love the city of Miami, but it's very expensive out here. And that's one thing that was huge for me. But also, I think me primarily, I'm a programmer at heart. Events, programs, workshop facilitation, that's what I do. I wanted a space that allowed me to freely create and freely innovate. Because those of you who work in programming, I think there comes times when you start realizing the programming becomes very repetitive. You're doing the same things year after year. Those annual events are great, but like every year it looks the same. You're bringing the same people in, you're bringing in the same acts, like this and that. It got to a point, even in my last role, I was like, all right, at what point does history and tradition start hindering progress? Because yes, we're doing these programs over and over, but there's no growth to the program. Like there's no growth. Like when we're looking at these assessment numbers, like, you know how hard it is to assess in programming outside of attendance numbers? Like actually getting people to do surveys and stuff is hard. But when you actually get those numbers, like what do you do with them if you're not going to help evolve the program? So I wanted to make sure that when I got to a space, they allowed me to freely create, freely innovate. And I wanted a space where I could just authentically be myself within the culture I was working in. I mean, I'm a Black man in Miami, Florida. And I would say at the University of Miami, we always say we're the most diverse institution across the nation, and we are. At the student level, staff level is not the same. Like I think right now we have one Black person working in our Department of Student Life, 1 out of 5 departments. That, like, we talk about diversity and inclusion, diverse institution, not inclusive staff though, right? I mean, like this is an honest conversation we're having right here. But again, I just wanted a space that would, come in and let me create freely, innovate freely, and it just allowed me to do the programs the best way I see fit.
So I got a question from the audience about timeline related to post-TPE / regarding official offer / accepting / declining. And so one of you all want to talk about what that process looked like for you all.
Yeah, timeline. The timeline will differ based on where the institution is at in their hiring process. Most interviews happen around what we call third quarter, which is that March, April, May area, just in time for the new fiscal year to start in June. So for me, the 3 on-campus interviews I took, my first one was to Georgia Southern. That happened within 3 weeks of TPE, well, that's within 3 weeks of NASPA ending. I'm at the conclusion of all that, which was like mid-March, I believe. And then first week of April is when I went to Georgia Southern. And then by the 3rd week of April is when I went to Virginia Tech. And then the last week of April was when I went to University of Miami. University of Miami was actually the 2nd institution to call me. And they called me first week of May, literally the week before graduation. So it can happen very fast, but I know not all offers happen that fast as well. I had one of the places I interviewed, they didn't even hit me back on an email until I think like June. By then I was already moved into Miami. So it'll vary based on where the institution is at in their hiring process. Some take slower than others, but others really like to be on it. Because when you think about it, this would be another piece of advice, use TPE as practice for the on-campus interview. You're gonna have at least 8 to 10 interviews in one day. I mean, if you're going to be at TPE, use that as practice for the on-campus interview. But I mean, I think most, as far as the timeline goes, is going to vary based on the institution and where they're at in the hiring process, how many people they hire. They're going to, if a company's looking, or if a school's looking at 10 people, they're probably going to do 5 phone interviews from those 10 people, and then from those 5 people, they'll bring 3 to campus. So you have to count into a fact that the TPE interview is probably the first interview. Second interview, you might get a Skype, and then the 3rd interview will be on campus. So it may vary.
And I would say add like a few weeks. We're in a pandemic, so just want to be mindful about that, because you have to understand that while these people are running search committees, they're also now thinking about what the heck are we going to do for commencement? What the heck are we going to do to ensure that we can do these leadership awards and acknowledge the students and the work that they've done and do COVID testing? So there's like a lot of things that we're all managing, especially someone that has served as a hiring manager. You're managing a lot to make sure that you can be able to get it done in a timeline. I will say in general, one of my issues is the lack of communication. So I do recommend that if you do get an interview, ask your very last question to be, What is your timeline? What are the next steps? So you can be informed about it, and then you can hold them accountable to communicating with you one way or another. So if they tell you 2 weeks, you wait those 2 weeks and you follow up and say, hey, what's good? Just following up, wanted to make sure, you know, I heard something about where you were at. And I think this is important if you have, if you're one of those people that have multiple offers. So I did have multiple offers when I went through the process. And once again, do not use this as a comparison point. I accepted my job at the University of Miami, April 30th. When I interviewed probably the week before that at the University of Miami. And while I was at the University of Miami, I was in the hotel turning down the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And it was literally just like, I hadn't interviewed yet, but I just knew that that wasn't where I was going to be at. And part of the conversation for me was thinking, okay, when is it that these other institutions are going to get back to me? Is there any way that I can know? And you can be able to apply pressure if you have those multiple roles to say, hey, I've heard from another institution and wanted to check in to see where you all were at in your timeline. And while you're legally not allowed to say anything, an institution will tell you one way or another whether they feel strongly about you or not. And then you have to be able to take an educated risk, I guess, and be able to bet on yourself one way or another. I always say, I'm gonna keep it real with y'all. I grew up very humble beginnings. If the money matters for you, get the money. I'm not gonna be here bashing you for one way or another. I think people make decisions for different reasons. Think about your financial circumstances and make a decision with that in mind. Like, I'm not here to judge you one way or another. I think people make a bunch of really dumbass statements, excuse my language, about hiring practices without knowing the financial circumstances people are navigating. And that's one thing that I feel very passionate about.
All right, we are coming to our end here. I guess we'll throw this last question in here. What advice would you give to yourself if you were applying for roles during this current moment in the world? So what advice would you give to yourself going through TPE if you were going through TPE in this current moment in the world?
That's a good one, because what we're going through right now is unlike, you know, anything anybody's ever experienced before, right? And we're like, what, 11 months into, you know, the pandemic. I like this question, mainly because it's, I mean, even me right now as a panelist, it's forcing me to even think outside the box, because here I am, you know, in a space where I have a job already and I don't have to go through it. But now I'm thinking about those of my colleagues and, like, you know, graduate students, people who are on the search. Like, all right, well, you know, what would you say to me, you know, if I was in this position? But I think, you know, for on the spot, the advice I can give anyone, you know, job searching right now is treat it as if it was the exact same as last year. You know, yeah, it's virtual, but you're still talking to somebody, and you're still, for the most part, you may be seeing somebody, but the conversation is still going to happen now, just like it would as if you were in face to face and person to person. So you still have to come with the same energy. You still have to come in with your knowledge content. You still have to come in with your research done. So if you can, I think at the very beginning of the pandemic, people were trying to create the sense of normalcy, which was good. But I think even right now in the hiring space, you still have to kind of keep that same energy. We know Zoom fatigue is a thing, pandemic fatigue is a thing, but right now on the job search, you may have to get over that, you know, and just create a sense of normalcy. So when you're on these interviews, you're still talking to somebody that's looking to hire. You're still talking to someone that's looking to pay you to facilitate a specific role in a functional area. You're still having a conversation with multiple people about why you're the best fit for a particular department. So treat what's happening now, you know, TPE, virtual, you know, all that, treat it now as if you would an in-person. Because obviously you're still doing the same thing. It's just, I'm still in front of you. It's just not in person, but I'm still able to see you all and talk to you all. So treat this space as if you would treat an in-person space.
I would say, I really had to think about this. So, awesome question. I would say be the most you possibly can be. What I mean by that, I have a general rule when it comes to interviewing. You want to be as close to who you are in general, if not completely who you are, as much as possible in an interview process. And the reason why is you want to ensure that any institution that does offer you is hiring you, not the perception, not the facade, not the front. They're hiring you. So then when you're having conversations about boundaries, expectations, professional development, this isn't new for whoever has hired you. Those are things you made clear in the interview process. And as someone that hires folks, I always struggle with people that I feel like are faking the funk, right? Don't fake the funk. Be as close as possible to who you are, because then I don't even know if I'm hiring the right person. If I feel like your things are scripted, if I feel like you're giving me what I want to hear because you have a monitor that you can be able to access now, right? And while that is undoubtedly helpful and is a huge resource, and I encourage you all to use it, be as close as to who you are as possible. Whenever I interview, you're gonna hear me, I'm loud. I'm very critical. I acknowledge how much space I take up, and I'm gonna hold you accountable. And then when you have conversations with me as your supervisor, then I can say, well, you knew what you were signing up for when you hired me, right? Right? Like, we can have a very real conversation about it. So be the most you as possible, because I think it's gonna be so important to get that across in a virtual environment. If you're not gonna be physically on campus, if you're not gonna be physically, show your personality. Wear some clothes that really makes you feel comfortable and good and powerful and confident, right? Like, yo, show up there, own the virtual space, make it clear about what you need, hold people accountable to those needs, ask good questions, and just show up and be open to having a conversation with folks, even if you don't get the position. I think if you do that, you treat this process as real as possible, as authentically as you possibly can. And I know that that is mediated undoubtedly by identity, right? So now I know my manness and my cisgenderness permeates and allows for me to navigate with more confidence in that regard, right? So do that to the most of your capability and as like the most possibly you can, right? Given the identities that you hold. But yo, I think that if you do that, regardless of what ends up happening, you're set yourself up to have a community of educators that see value in your work, that will want to be connected to you and will want to support you.
That is our time, folks. Thank you all for attending our first webinar of 5. So we have 4 more left throughout the week. If you do have any additional questions for our 2 panelists, both of them have shared their LinkedIns in the chat. And so feel free to use LinkedIn to connect. So don't just ask them a question today, ask them one tomorrow and the next day. With that being said, thank you all for attending our candidate roundtable, and we look forward to seeing you all again throughout the week. I'm happy you all could be in this session. Thank you.